Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about one of the principle of the network security, which is the zero trust security model. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the zero trust security model, the fundamentals around it, and with one of the examples that can help in understanding the zero trust security model. Having talked about it, today we'll go through some slides and then some of the examples that's present in the slides. So this is going to be an presentation, and we will discuss more about it on the every slides as we go on further. So this is a small history of the zero trust security. When we talk about the zero trust security, it existed from 1994, which is like more than 2 decades ago. It was first coined in one of the doctoral thesis on a computer security by Stephen Paul Marsh, and then later in May 1994, the Sun Microsystems engineer started describing not the zero trust security, a kind of security by describing the firewall's perimeter defense. That's when people started talking about the firewall's perimeter and everything. And in 2001, the first version of the open source security testing methodology was released, focusing on the trust. So, how we are going to trust the network. And in 2009, Google implemented the zero trust architecture, which is referred to as the Beyond Code. If you want to take a look at more about it, then you Google it. There are a lot of articles which will help you in understanding. Because I don't want to bring that into this, because we're talking overall the fundamentals about the zero trust security. And finally, in 2010, the term zero trust model was used to denote the stricter cybersecurity programs and access control within the corporations. So it took almost a decade for the zero trust architectures to be studied, and then become prevalent, and then it was started slowly adopting. So now in today's world, the zero trust is a security model, which is a principle of never trust, always verify. So that's the core concept of the zero trust model. Having talked about it, let's move to the next slide. You might ask a question. Yes, zero trust is good. It's a kind of a security model. Like, you're not going to trust it whether the network is going to be inside or outside the corporate network perimeter. So access to the resources is always granted based on the identity verification, the device health, or whatever it might be. So you say don't trust any network. That's why it's called zero trust. But the question comes into your mind: why I need to go for the zero trust? Because this is also one of the security model. Uh, does it make sense for my organization to adopt the zero trust? Well, uh, like post COVID, a lot of companies have migrated their applications as well as the data is present in the cloud. So as a result of that, your data is no longer, and your application is no longer residing only in your data center. Because right now you have a extended hybrid cloud setup where you have a, for example, you have an express route circuits set up from your data centers towards Microsoft. You have a dedicated VPN tunnel set up to different cloud providers, different partners, different SaaS providers. And having said that, now your perimeter has expanded, and that brings a larger blast radius for the ransomware attacks and all the other stuff. And the second part is, previously, user used to connect from the office and connect from the home is really not that big volume. But now you got the concept of remote connections everywhere, because all the companies are eventually promoting and adapting the hybrid work culture. As a result of that, there are a lot of remote connections users. And you have the SaaS applications which is utilized. For example, let's talk about Microsoft Teams, which is provided by Microsoft. SaaS, it's one of the SaaS software which is consumed from the Microsoft cloud. If you are enrolled for the Microsoft 365, yes, you are consuming the service, but at the end, there is some data which is also going there. And it's your responsibility to make sure that you are defining your zero trust model and how are you going to consume the service, because it's there are multiple SaaS providers, they can provide the service, but it's your responsibility to define how are you going to bring the zero trust for your endpoints, and how are you going to consume the the applications and the data whatever you have. And the main thing is like there is no control over SaaS applications. So like for example, the SaaS application you call anything, you don't have much control over it. So at the end, you have to define your perimeter. You need to define some criteria how the end users are going to access the data. Let it be in your data center or let it be in your in any of the SaaS providers. So it's the responsibility that you need to take care of it. And last but not the least, the more workloads are migrated to cloud and the hybrid setup is increasing, so your data is in the cloud. So you also need to take into that consideration every every SaaS provider is giving you the service, but it's the responsibility of any organization to define the zero trust model and define the parameters how the users are going to consume the data and the services. So this is an example of how it could be. The diagram you see, the user one, he can access the data from externally towards the data center, which is the private cloud. He or she can have a VPN connection to your data center, and then he can consume the services. But if you talk about the user three, yeah, there is a split tunnel configuration where the user can consume the public cloud as well as the user can consume the services which is running in the data center. So as a result of this, your blast radius is increasing. So this is um, the security team's responsibility to make sure that enough security measures are in place, because the data that's being consumed is from different regions, different places, different data centers. So that's very important. So having talked about it, we are going to talk about something about the principles of the zero trust. So the principles of the zero trust is like it assumes that the threat could be both externally as well as internally, and it aims to mitigate the risks that is associated with both, which is in your data center as well as which is in your SaaS provider, by adopting more granular and dynamic approach that helps to provide access to your applications and the services and also to your data. Some key principles of the data, some key principles of the zero trust, like you see the diagram which I have, two diagrams. Over the left is the traditional one, like a user is having a laptop, is sitting in the home when the user initiates a VPN session over the internet and then connects to the data center. That's a trusted network. Then the user can access everything. There is no problem and no need to verify about it. But in zero trust model, you cannot go with that approach, because the data the user is accessing, the service user is consuming, it doesn't lie only within your data center. It goes across your data center because there is a hybrid setup and also there's a SaaS application which has been consumed. So as a result of that, you have to adopt all these four strategies. First, you need to verify the explicit every connection that's initiating from the user. You need to verify that explicitly. There are a lot of things that we can discuss in the upcoming slides, and use the least privileged access, because that's very important. Giving more privileged access is also a risk in the state. And let's think about giving access only from the place where there is a proper managed device, like you are giving access only from a managed device where the device health is perfect, where the device is monitored with an antivirus, and the endpoint detection and response, all these things are implemented on the device, so that your data and your service is not compromised. And last but not the least, you should also have a continuous monitoring in place. So you see the circle which is present over the right. You see there should be a continuous monitoring in place. The device health needs to be perfectly fine, and the user identity needs to be verified in terms of a second factor authentication or any type of modern authentication like passwordless or a certificate based authentication. And the user and the device needs to sorry and overall the network needs to be monitored with the UB, like user and entity behavior analytics, for example. So with the UBA you can see like how is your network, your environment performing overall in terms of the the access and then the networks and the logs and also the services whatever they are consuming. Going further, implementing a zero trust model. It involves a combination of a strategy, technologies, and best practices to enhance the security posture and protect the critical assets. So this is the high level overview. So if you ask me about, okay, you have explained me about the zero trust security model, but how do I implement it? There are a lot of tools in the market. Like there are a lot of options in the market that you can explore and do it. So that is the important thing is like you need to involve a combination of a strategy and choose the right technology and the best practices. So all these three you would be able to implement it. In my example, I'm just showing it with Microsoft. So like you see like over the right side, these are all the features that you could utilize when looking into the Microsoft Cloud. So, as I said, the zero trust model is a concept. There are several tools and technologies. So, you need to choose the right user identity. For example, if you're talking about Microsoft, you can choose Entra ID that can help you in enabling the modern authentication. For example, you can have the passwordless, you can have the certificate based authentication, or you can have MFA, whatever you call it. And the network security over the top, you have the option to enable DDoS protection on Azure. You have the option to enable some security measures on the network security group. So all these things can help in securing your web applications that is hosted in the Azure or you're consuming as a SaaS. So all these things that can help you. For example, a VM which is running in the Azure, or you have microservices which is running. So all these things, there are a lot of network security that you can enable. For example, Azure DDoS protection. Those things will definitely help you in securing your web apps that is running in your Azure subscription. And we talk about Microsoft Intune. That is the one which helps in the endpoint security solutions. Like you need to have a compliant device. What is a compliant device? It should have a Microsoft Defender enabled. It should have the all the standard firewall rules enabled. The device needs to be Entra ID registered, and other security measures that you can verify. And any one of this is not matching, then access is not granted. As simple as that. And you talk about the sentinel, that helps in definitely helping looking into the logs, looking into the anomaly activities that's happening. You can also create alerts and send the alerts to the ticketing system, and your SOC team can be notified. That's also possible. And you talk about the Azure Monitor, that would definitely help in monitoring your web applications that is running in the cloud, and any kind of anomalies. You can also definitely create an alert, action alerts, and then send it to your SOC team or your ticketing system. Um, and the last is the conditional access. That's a very important thing. With the conditional access, you can protect all your SaaS applications as well as the applications that's registered in the Microsoft Entra ID with the condition and control, which is going to define the zero trust security model. That's the best way. One of the example that you can utilize, and one of the security tooling that you can think of for the zero trust model. And going further, these are the steps I have mentioned, like how to get started. Okay, you talked about implementing a zero trust security model. You talked about principles, well and fine. How to get started? This is the way like I would start looking at it. Like first identify and classify your assets, like how much data you have, what are the applications, services, and where do they reside, and the sensitivity level. Yeah, it's the last part is really difficult. If you have it, then that's also perfectly fine. um, and defining the security perimeter, yes, this is not required. Like when you're talking about zero trust, defining the security parameter is not required. But initially, when you are starting it from the scratch on a vanilla deployment, it's really difficult to go directly to a zero trust. So that's the reason you need to create the micro perimeters. There should be some business critical applications which doesn't need to pass through all these gates, so that you should have some micro perimeters that can be that can be added into exceptions or kept as a backup plan when you are doing this. For example, conditional access trusted locations, trusted IPs. So those things you can just add and keep it as a backup plan. And then you need to adopt the strong authentication. That's very easy. Most of the organization have implemented MFA for all users, so that's going to really help you. So the thing is, like, you need to adopt this for all the applications other than the Microsoft 365. For example, any applications, the SaaS applications or the applications that is registered in Entra ID, consuming the Entra ID as your IDP provider. So those things needs to adopt to the modern authentication. Only then you will be able to secure and protect it. That's a very important thing. And then you need to segment your network. That's also very important. Like, you need to create the isolated zones, network controls to prevent lateral movement. That's also very important. And the last thing is like data encryption. Implement the protocols like HTTPS and also technologies like BitLocker, Azure Disk Encryption. Yeah, that will really help you in protecting your data. Having talked about it, now I'm going to give you an example of one tooling from Microsoft, which is the conditional access. So here in the conditional access for zero trust, over the right, let's look into the diagram, because let's park the bullet points what I have. Let's look into the diagram. So basically, conditional access works on two things. First is condition, and the second is the control. So conditional access is basically like you could apply condition by creating a new policy and say, okay, if the resource is accessed by all users or a group of users, if the user is accessing from a Mac device or from a Windows device or from a Linux device or from an Android, iOS, choose whatever it might be. And if the user is coming from a specific location or if the user is coming from any location, you could apply these controls. You can say, okay, allow access, limit access, require MFA, force the password change. Or even you could check like the device is coming from the Entra ID join, device is in tune compliant. All these things you'll be able to see. So this conditional access uses the machine learning and it analyzes over 171 terabytes of data every day from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence database. With that, it is evaluating the user session and risks. So basically, you'll be able to create policies and then implement those policies for the users, for the applications, for the devices in your organization. So on the left, if you take a look at it, how do you start? First, you need to sync all the active users to the Entra ID. If you have hybrid deployment, enroll users to the MFA, and then enforce all SaaS applications to MFA or passwordless. So that's also one of the option. And integrate your applications with Entra ID. Yeah, keep in mind, only when your application is registered in the Entra ID, you will be able to effectively utilize all these things. And access only from a managed device. In that case, like, you need to make sure the device is Entra ID registered or Entra ID hybrid join, and then manage with the Microsoft Intune. And lastly, you would be able to enforce the conditional access policies. And going further, this is like how do you plan your conditional access strategy. Conditional access provide flexibility and handy control of user and device accessing the corporate resources. Um, like, for example, block access to a SaaS application coming from a non-compliant device, which I was telling in the previous slide. And if you take a look at the diagram which we have over the right, this is the identities, which could be little bit different personas. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. But if you talk about the identities, like here in this case, it's a user. Okay, that's the identity provider is going to be the Entra ID in our case. If the user is trying to access your application, your SaaS application, then the user would be challenged for the multi-factor authentication. And you could also enforce some session risk. Session risk is like the user is accessing one of your SaaS application, the session would be terminated after 1 hour. The session would be terminated after 2 hours. This you could implement for any critical business applications. So it's a session based policy, which in this case, the token is expired when you implement the session based policy. And if you talk about the corporate devices, you have the device risk and the compliance state. So if the device risk could be like if the Microsoft Defender for endpoint is turned off, if the firewall default rules is not turned on, then I'm not going to give access to my SaaS application. I'm not going to give access to my on-premise application. These are the things you would be able to implement. So by doing this, then it is going an additional layer of security. And on top of that, you could also integrate the threat intelligence. For example, you have the EDR in the Microsoft Defender. You would be able to integrate the EDR. It would be able to collect the logs and then discover and report any kind of issues that is been identified. That's also very good. So overall, with the conditional access strategy, like this is how you should plan. Like how is your identity, who is going to be identity provider, and then how are you going to define the managed device? Because managed device itself a concept that you need to think. The device needs to be, having the endpoint enabled. The device needs to have the antivirus enabled. The device needs to have the firewall policies enabled. So these are the things that you need to define. So going further, I was talking about the personas and architecture. So the first thing is when you're defining the zero trust, I would always suggest to start with the selected list of users and the selected list of applications. That's very important because if you target in a huge environment a zero trust for all cloud apps for all users, you don't know how it is going to be the impact. So you need to always assess, do it in a phased approach, and go for the targeted conditional access approach. That's very important. And the person was talking about it over the right side when you're talking about identities in the previous slide. Those identities could be internal users, external users. They could be guests. They could be service accounts. They could be workload identities. So there are a lot of things that you need to take into consideration before going for the zero trust. Because let's take about an example. Um, that is the workload identities, one of the service principal which is registered, and then like they are running from one of the trusted location where you wouldn't be able to implement zero trust on it. So those kind of things you need to do an analysis and always go with a targeted approach. Set of users, set of applications, try the zero trust, and then see how it is going further. And then later go eventually increasing the number of applications, users, excuse me, security controls in the zero trust approach. So this is one of the example how it looks like when you deploy the conditional access. This is just one simple example taken from a test tenant. So here, if you talk about, like there is a conditional access where I have targeted for Microsoft Teams, a set of users, and here you see, you talk about the targeted resources. That's Microsoft Teams services, and the client apps. I have included two, that which is like browser and Microsoft Teams client, and then you see the grant access require MFA. If you want additional set of controls, you can see required device to be marked as compliant, require Microsoft Entra hybrid join device, required approved client app. So these kind of things you can do. And by the way, the required approved client app is not present for all of the apps which is registered in your Entra ID. So if your application is present in the list of approved client apps, then you would be able to enforce it. Yeah, or else then you need to look for other ways of enforcing, like for example, require MFA and require device to be compliant, or require Microsoft Entra hybrid joint device. When you select this, then the users wouldn't be able to access it from a device that is not part of your organization. So having talked about it, so this is how it looks like. Um, Over the left, you see the classic approach. You can understand that is like restrict everything to a secure network. We say in the previous legacy way that we say, okay, this is my network. If you want, if you have a VPN connected laptop, then access is granted to the network, you can do whatever you want. Um, but in the zero trust, the concept is you're going to protect all the assets anywhere with the central policies. So that's the way, because your data is spread across the application that you're consuming is present across everywhere, and that's the reason people are going with the zero trust right now. So overall, we have come to the summary page. So in the summary page, zero trust, of course, it's a holistic security approach that aims to improve the security posture in today's evolving threat landscape by shifting from traditional perimeter-based security model to a more adaptive, context-aware approach. So, if we talk about one example, conditional access, if you talk in the graph, if you have a weaker policies, then we have a less secure application, and it is less. It's having a less business impact. Like for example, you have only MFA, and if you're excluding the trusted locations, then yeah, it's less secure and less business impact. And when you're adopting to a more stronger policies, then like for example, managed endpoint, MFA enforced, app protection policies, approved client app, Microsoft Purview, inside risk management, all these things you're bringing, then it might cause more business impact. You need to do some analysis and understand what are the applications ready for this case, because all the applications are not ready uh, to adopt the very stronger MFA policies. So these things you need to keep into consideration. So overall, when we're talking about the conditional access policies that you can use for the zero trust, always plan and assess your current environment, identify the resources which is capable of doing this, uh, like the applications, and configure the policies, define the access controls, finally test and validate them lot of times, and finally deploy and monitor. So overall, by implementing a zero trust via conditional access, organizations can enhance their security posture by dynamically adjusting access control based on contextual factors and risk assessment. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you.